dock worker of Northern Ireland, Austin saw firsthand the struggles imposed by the British majority against Catholic minority Irish, longing for a peaceful, united Ireland. He had a passion for Ireland's culture, especially language, was derided and often suppressed by the British authorities. So that's my brief statement. I'm going to pass it on to Steve Leyden, and then Patrick Costello will give a more in-depth story about Geordy. Thank you.
Before I start, my last name, my surname originated in Mayo, and in Mayo and Galway, the dialect of English they speak, my name is Leyden, just like Nick said, but my family's from Clare, and in Clare it's Leyden, so that's the battle I've fought all my life. Before I start, I just want to tell you, I talked to Geordy's sister in Australia and his daughter in Belfast and his son in France this morning. They're all very excited that we're doing this, so they thank everybody for coming. Nick had asked me to read Geordy's eulogy, and I'll get into that in a minute. It was from his funeral last year, and I thought I'd tell you how I met Geordy Austin first, though. 25 years ago, our sons graduated from college, and they were out on their own, and my wife said, you know what, you better find something to fill your time now that we have this empty nest. So I made the fateful decision to join the Syracuse AOH. And I said, well, I'm from San Francisco. I didn't grow up on Tipperary Hill in Syracuse. I don't know anybody in the AOH, but I'll go to maybe 2 meetings. I'll give it 2 meetings, and if nobody talks to me, I'll just quit. So the first meeting I went to, I liked the meeting, but I still didn't know anybody. And everybody adjourned to the bar after the meeting, and I said, I wonder if somebody's going to talk to me. Well, there was a man leaning against the wall, and he saw me coming, and he gave me the finger like this. You know? And that was Geordy. If you ever talk to Geordy, the questions that he would fire out, you know, where's your family from? I said, Clare. And I said, you're from the north, because I knew it wasn't just an Irish accent, but it was an Ulster accent. He says, yeah, I'm from Antrim. I said, well, you know, my Leydens are from Clare, but my McManus family, the other side, is from Antrim. Oh, where? And I said, oh, a little tiny village with 200 people in it, you've never heard of it. I've heard of everywhere in Antrim. So I told him the name of the town. He goes, I know it well. And I said, how do you know it well? He goes, well, there's a little pub on the shore of Loch Ness. I said, yeah, that's my cousins, they own that pub. He says, the one with the boat launch. I said, yeah, that's the boat launch right next to the pub. He said, we used to take our arms and ammunition and wrap them in plastic and weight them down with salt licks, take a rowboat out from the salt lick at that pub and row out into Loch Ness and drop the arms overboard, and the salt lick would weigh them down, and the British patrol boats would go back and forth for a week at a time. It took a week for those salt blocks to dissolve and melt down, and we had floats tied to the plastic, so after a week, everything would float to the surface. We'd go out at night in the week, and we'd pick everything up off the surface of the lake, and we never got our arms. Then he started telling me about himself, and he lived in San Francisco. That's where I'm from. I'm not from here. I grew up in San Francisco. And he knew the neighborhood where my grandparents and my aunts and my dad lived. He knew it in detail. He talked about San Francisco and the Irish community there. So then he found out about my family's long and proud IRA history, and we still have the medals from the Irish government for fighting the Brits. And so now I was his fast friend. You know, we had a lot to share in common. And it was the most fruitful friendship I've ever had in my life. Just what a unique individual. And if any of you know Al Siste, I just saw him downstairs, he was leaving, but I said, Al, I'm going to quote you tonight, because Al summed it up 10 years ago this year, in 2015, at Mohawk Valley Community College. There was the Project Children presentation, and Geordy was on the panel. And we reconvened after the discussion was over at the Celtic Harp, and Al turned, and Geordy was holding court with a big circle around him, you know, and Al said, you know, when we lose Geordy, it's going to be a loss that we can never, ever replace, with the knowledge he has and the history he has and the life experience he has. And we got 9 more years out of Geordy after that. So, make my long, boring personal story short, last year we returned from a vacation in Ireland, and of course my first thing I do when I get back is call Geordy and tell him where we went and what cousins I saw and everything. Well, I knew he was battling health issues, and we discussed it for months. And his first words when he picked up the phone was, I'm not going to make it, Steve. So I went over and visited him, and the first thing he said is, would you do the eulogy at my funeral, which is the biggest honor of my life. So with Hope Cudahy's help, she was feeding me information, and I had information, And what I'm going to read to you is very sanitized because the priest at St. Patrick's in Syracuse was very nervous what we returned this funeral into. So Hope was more aggressive than me. No, put that in. But, you know, if something sounds a little soft, that's my doing, not Hope's. Hope was all for telling the absolute truth. But, we had to soften some things up, but I'll just read it to you. Geordy's parents were Patrick and Maggie McGee Austin. Both of his parents were born into extreme poverty in Belfast. His mother went to work in the mills at 8 years old, and his father went to work at 10 years old. Geordy shared a small row home with his 3 sisters, 7 brothers, and parents, and lived in a close-knit community. Through years of hardship and unfair treatment of Catholics, a passion was born in his parents for justice, fair working conditions, and the right to be Irish and proud. This was passed on to Geordy. This is where he got his passion, strength, and love of Ireland. Geordy dedicated his life to a united Ireland from an early age. He never stopped working for equal voting rights, housing rights, and employment rights for Catholics in the north of Ireland. He always fought for the underdog and those less fortunate. Some of Geordy's very early childhood memories were of the Belfast Blitz, where German bombers destroyed military and civilian targets, killing 900 people in 4 air raids. Geordy's neighborhood was hit hard and many of his neighbors were killed. Those scenes of destruction never left his memory. Here's a brief list of some of Geordy's major accomplishments over the past 8 decades. Geordy was an active participant in the IRA's border campaign from 1956 to 1962. Its goal was overthrowing British rule and creating a united Ireland. Although unsuccessful, the campaign inspired Geordy to continue the fight no matter where he's lived. Beginning in 1969, during what's known as the Troubles, Geordy found ways to bring medical supplies, food, and clothing into the north of Ireland, despite cross-border roads and bridges being cratered and blockaded by the British Army to make them impassable to traffic. His expertise as a blockade runner caused him to be a guest of Her Majesty in Crumlin Road Jail for a time. Geordy frequently told of how he learned to speak Irish while a resident there. The guards only spoke English, so the Irish language came in handy. He always said he didn't learn Gael-talked Irish, he learned jail-talk Irish. In the 1980s, Geordy settled in the United States in San Francisco's large Irish immigrant community. He made powerful friends there and was selected to be part of the team led by actress Fionnuala Flanagan to lobby the California State Legislature and the governor to pass a resolution in support of what became the Good Friday Agreement. The agreement went into effect in 1998. He moved from California to Texas, then on to New Mexico, where he fell in love with Diane. They moved to Seattle, Washington for a few years before making their final move to Syracuse in 2000. He immediately took a leadership role in the local Irish community. He was local president of the International Irish American Cultural Institute in 2007 and served in several officer positions in the Ancient Order of Hibernians. When the blockade of Belfast Holy Cross Girls' School by Loyalist Protestants made international headlines in 2001 and 2002, Geordy raised funds and led a contingent of Hibernians to Belfast to prevent a check to the school. When Geordy found that Irish immigrant Willie Farrell had been murdered in Tully, New York in 1821 because he was Catholic and was buried in an unmarked grave without a funeral, he raised funds for a headstone and organized a funeral mass. He wrote and sang a song dedicated to Willie Farrell and made annual gravesite visits. Geordy was instrumental in co-founding a sessions group within the IIACI, who met at Rockwell Elementary School in Nedrow from 2002 to 2012. Instruments included fiddles, whistles, flutes, guitars, bowrons, concertina, piano, accordion, and singing, with 15 musicians participating. With the Irish American Cultural Institute, Geordy supported the annual education program of An Garda Mór, the Great Hunger, which was the genocide by starvation of Irish people. The program included a play with music, singers, and a photo display. This program was very important to Geordy due to his family history in the north of Ireland and the mistreatment by the British government for hundreds of years. Geordy served in several officer positions in the AOH and was the chairman of the Freedom for All Ireland Committee and the chairman of the Irish History Committee. When the National AOH directed Christmas appeal donations to some charities which deviated from the AOH mission, Geordy made sure that our Syracuse Division's donations continued to go to the families of political prisoners. In 2014, he received an AOH award for his Freedom for All Ireland work. In 2009, he co-founded the Central New York Irish Cultural Society in order to be sure that membership funds were directed to local needs and furthering Irish history and education. Geordy was a past president and is currently vice president. This productive group continues to offer Irish history, culture, and social events with an emphasis on financially supporting local Irish dancers, Irish language programs, and the Food Bank of Central New York. It has members throughout Central New York. In October 2012, Hurricane Sandy destroyed the Irish American communities in Garrettson Beach, Brooklyn, and Breezy Point, Queens. Geordy quickly organized a casino night to raise relief funds. 3 months after the hurricane, he presented a check for $4,000 to the Garrettson Beach, Brooklyn AOH, who had been serving 3 meals daily to the people who lost their homes. He said, if we don't step up and help, then why are we here? In 2015, Geordy was the keynote speaker at Project Children, a Catholic's View of the Northern Ireland Conflict Symposium held at Mohawk Valley Community College. He was joined by 2-time Nobel Peace Prize nominee Dennis Mulcahy. In 2016, Geordy organized a celebration of the 100th anniversary of the Easter Rising. This included a wreath laying around the grave of the boy mayor of Syracuse, James Maguire, the raising of the Irish flag at City Hall, the 1916 proclamation read by the mayor, and a reception at Kitty Hoyne's restaurant. Geordy pulled together all Irish groups in Onondaga County to get this done. The event led to the creation of the Central New York Irish Coalition, which was formed to utilize the combined resources of local Irish groups and societies to promote our Irish culture in Onondaga County. This includes nonviolent Irish causes, art, history, and language. The coalition continues to participate in the annual Irish Freedom Week in April with the Irish flag raising ceremony at Syracuse City Hall. In 2019, Geordy organized a celebration of the 200th anniversary of the first Catholic Mass held in Onondaga County. It was celebrated in the Syracuse home of Thomas McCarthy, a native of Cork, in 1819 by a priest sent from St. John's Church in Utica. Geordy arranged for Congressman John Katko to speak after the Mass. With Geordy's love of music, in 2019 he organized a basic Irish fiddle class held at All Saints Church. It had 9 participants, 8 females, and of course, Geordy, with more advanced members teaching very new students. The class ended due to COVID, though the Central New York Irish Cultural Society gained 5 new members. In 2021, Geordy led the effort to obtain a pardon from the governor of Pennsylvania for the Molly Maguires, a group of Irish coal miners who were executed after being falsely accused of murder. The men were all AOH members. The effort is ongoing. Also, for 5 years, Geordy petitioned for enshrinement of world champion Irish boxer Mike McTighe in the Boxing Hall of Fame in Canastota, New York. This effort is also ongoing. Geordy had a love for the Irish language. Geordy's mother and some of his siblings were fluent Irish speakers. When he was a boy, British law forbade it to be taught in schools in the north of Ireland. He made sure the language was always remembered here. In 2019, he recruited Tom Malley from Utica to come to the Marriott Hotel Syracuse to teach basic Irish language. After Tom became ill, Geordy resumed Irish language classes in 2023 at the DeWitt Jamesville Library and online during the winter months with Shannon O'Neill as our teacher. Besides educating many about our Irish culture, Geordy enjoyed talking with everyone, reading poems and history, learning about home repairs on YouTube, salvaging and artistically creating new items from old wood, building rock walls, working with others, and giving his time to those in need of love and support. We all have dozens of favorite Geordy stories. One of my favorites is how he refused to recognize the legitimacy of Britain's occupation of the North. When he heard someone say Northern Ireland, he'd correct them and say, "You must be talking about the north of Ireland. There's no such thing as Northern Ireland." His kindness and sense of humor will never be forgotten. So that was from last year. And Nick wanted me to read, we're going to see the interview. When Geordy was in San Francisco, he was interviewed by John Fogerty. So Nick found the bio of John Fogerty. He wanted me to just read it before we saw the video. John Fogerty, Irish-American peace activist, died Wednesday, July 7th, 2010 in Stockton, California after fighting a long battle with cancer. John was born in 1946 in the Bronx, New York to William and Helen Fogerty. He moved to San Francisco in 1968. He had been a longtime activist for peace and reconciliation in Ireland. John had served locally, regionally, and nationally in the Irish-American Unity Conference, but it was his work on behalf of the H Block 4 that made him a well-known figure within the San Francisco Irish community, as well as Irish-American communities across the country. John's longtime friend, Geordy Austin, remembers John spent a lifetime in pursuit of fairness, and many injustices were overturned because of his efforts. I don't know of one major problem in the North that John was not aware of and working to change. To say that John was the cutting edge in many challenges to the Irish is putting it mildly. Razor edge would be more appropriate. John assumed the role as national president of the Irish American Unity Conference in 2007, but had to resign in 2008 due to health reasons. Former Sinn Féin Belfast City Council member and personal friend Bobby Lavery stated, John's death has left the Republican family very sad and he will be sorely missed. So that's who John is that you're going to see in the video. But we've all got Geordy stories, and some of them have to be told in hushed tones in the back corner of the room. So, we don't make them public in a forum like this.
It'll go up after a few minutes.
Hell yeah.
Okay, Geordy, maybe you'd introduce yourself and tell us something about the way things were as you were growing up and
Okay, my name's Geordy Austin and I'm from Belfast, in the northern part of Ireland, which is occupied by the English and has been for over 800 years. And I'm an Irish nationalist and I come from a large ghetto area in Belfast. When I was growing up, there was a form of discrimination in housing, jobs and voting, which is calculated and planned so as to achieve the balance of power for the English. This was done by seeing that you didn't get a job and you didn't get a house. Therefore, a lot of people left the country and emigrated. And as the Catholics had larger families, that suited because the Protestant loyalist people who are loyal to England, they may have had 2, maybe 4, where the Catholics had 10 and 12 of a family, sometimes larger. And that would really have upset the balance of power as they would have spread out and achieved the vote. The voting system in that part was gerrymandered greatly and allowed to be by the local politicians. And the fact that in order to have a vote, you had to have a house or a job and pay tax. So what they did do was they didn't build houses for the Irish Catholics. And where they did build them, they built them in areas where they would not affect the voting structure. For example, in the city of Derry, you had 4 wards, and say, for example, they each returned 4 Congress people. Well, the Catholics were the majority in the city of Derry, so you might have had 15,000 Catholics, but they put them all into one ward, so as they would return just 4 congressmen, and you would have had maybe 12,000 Protestant people loyal to England, and they would have been in 3 separate wards, 4,000 in each ward, so they would have had 2 congressmen for each ward, and they would have had 6 congressmen for 12,000 votes, where the Irish Catholics would have only had 2. So that was one of the ways that they always achieved the balance of power.
so it would be clear then that it would be difficult to achieve equality through the voting booth.
It was, that's what the civil rights movement was started for, and the civil rights movement came about. There were a lot of young Irish Catholics in the northern part who took advantage of a free education system which England had worked out in the 1940s for England, but also applied to the northern part of Ireland. But they didn't imagine that these people would have taken as much advantage of it as they did. Bernadette Devlin, for example, was one of the most outstanding. She won a scholarship and she went to Queen's University and became very articulate in the political setup there. And also a lot of other people in the civil rights movement were from ordinary working class backgrounds but were pretty well educated. So they formed the backbone of the civil rights movement.
So what would you say then was the aims of the civil rights movement?
The civil rights movement was one man, one vote, and jobs and equality. British standards of justice, the same standards of justice that were being applied in England, were not being applied in Ireland because the law where you had to have a house, be a householder to have a vote, did not apply in England and had been terminated in something like 1945, between 1945 and 50. So you had a different standard of law. They were telling you were a British subject, but they weren't giving you British standards of justice.
So then the situation then in society forced at this time what we hear called the Troubles.
Yeah.
And the Troubles then involved the young people coming of age at that time in Ireland.
Well, what happened, I could just take you on to the civil rights movement. They were allowing the civil rights people to march and march, but they didn't do anything. They weren't achieving nothing. Actually, the first marches were banned by the Minister of Home Affairs, Bill Craig, and a lot of people were arrested, and they really didn't get anywhere at all. And it wasn't until the violence started. The civil rights marchers were attacked in the city of Derry by the police, and these people were not terrorists or involved in armed struggle at all. You had the Westminster MP, Jerry Fitt. You had local dignitaries and people who had been councillors and so forth. And these people who were having a non-violent, peaceful march were attacked by the police.
Were there any injuries caused that day in
Oh,
the
yeah.
police attack?
Oh yeah, there's scores of injuries. Yeah, there's a lot of people. It's well documented. The Westminster MP, Jerry Fitt, was hospitalised. He was struck by the police in Duke Street in Derry in 1969.
So at this time it seems there was an upsurge in IRA activity, is that true?
Not until after the civil rights movement, when people tried to acquire their rights by peaceful protest, then they were stopped by this armed force who were loyal to England, armed police force, and they actually, the first people that were killed in the so-called Troubles this time, they were killed by the police. And it's funny to say that the first policeman killed in these Troubles was Constable Arbuckle, who was shot dead by Thomas Rowntree, who was a member of the UVF at a protest where they were trying to see the B Specials, which is like kind of a National Guard police force, were being disbanded by England.
The UVF then is a loyalist paramilitary organization?
Yeah, it's Ulster Volunteer Force.
And are they a legal organization?
They are illegal, but what they've done is they've went into this other organisation, UDA, Ulster Defence Association, which is legal, even though a lot of its members have been involved in murders of just innocent Catholics, and I mean, there's been hundreds of deaths inflicted by these people, bombings and killings, and the British have refused to ban them.
Well, we hear often that the IRA is referred to as a terrorist organization. Could you tell us anything about what you think their aims might be, or their legitimate aspirations?
The IRA, the Irish Republican Army, is an extension of the Fenian, Old Fenian Brotherhood, and all the organisations that have participated over the years. The IRA first came to prominence in the 1916 rebellion. It was the Irish Republican Brotherhood, which later became the Irish Republican Army, and these people were successful in the 26 counties in achieving partial unity of the country. But that's just not acceptable. Ireland is a nation and the whole island should be free. And the IRA have been defensive of the Catholic neighbourhoods of Belfast throughout the history of the state of Northern Ireland, which has been formed from the 1920s, 70 years. And the IRA was formed this time, there's a resurgence, but it was in defence of Catholic areas which were burned and destroyed by the police and loyalist mobs burned large sections of Catholic Belfast and Derry.
So I believe we're talking now about the year 1956.
1969.
1969.
1956 was the 1956 to 1962. There was an IRA campaign, but it consisted mostly of border attacks between the borders of Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland. There was very, very few city operations by the Irish Republican Army then.
When we say that the police were responsible for the burnings of nationalist houses and stuff, is it credible to say that?
Oh yeah, the Scarman Tribunal, Lord Justice Scarman was Lord Chief Justice of England, and after there were 8 people killed in Belfast in August '69, and the British decided to have a public inquiry into this, but there would be no prosecutions. So they had Lord Justice Scarman, the Chief Justice of England, who headed the tribunal. I was at the tribunal myself, and it was documented that the RUC and the loyalist paramilitaries had got into sections of Catholic areas, and homes had been burned and while the RUC were present. And also there were RUC men who were going up for disciplinary action. But what the British done, I think there was 20 of them, but what the British done, they had Bernadette Devlin holding her in prison at the same time for leading the revolt in Derry. So they had an amnesty, and in that amnesty they pardoned the civil rights people, but they also pardoned the RUC.
See.
But it is documented that they were to be there was to be disciplinary action taken against them.
Okay, then as we go on, a large part of the revolution took place inside.
We could just make this point, John, that the B specials, which were the B set up as the A police are the permanent police. The B special is B, it's a temporary police force. After they behaved so badly in 1969 and lost all credibility, they were suspended. They were just wiped out. But England cunningly replaced them with another unit, which is the Ulster Defence Regiment, which took the place of them, which is the biggest unit in the British Army, and it's in the north of Ireland, and it's made up, the people just left, the bigots who were in the B Specials, they just left that organisation and went en bloc into the UDR to be better organised and better armed and better equipped all around.
So the B Specials would be equivalent in this country to an auxiliary police force.
I don't think you can compare them to this country. I think you'd have to compare them to the SS and the Stormtroopers. I don't think it would ever be possible to have such a police force in America.
So then the government used the worst of the people on the government side to put down the peaceful protests.
The B Specials were 100% Protestant loyalists. There never were Catholics in the B Special, ever.
Okay, and then could you tell us something about the violence at this time that was used to put down the marches?
Well, in August in '69, there was such an upsurge of civil rights activity that at the Scarman Tribunal, the head of the police force, Peacock, he said that when they were studying the map and the calls were coming in that night, that they thought, because of all this activity, that there was a revolution was planned, so that they overreacted. And what they done was they sent out these whippet armoured cars. They're a small version of a tank, and they carry high-powered machine guns. They sent them into the Catholic areas in order to quell the civil rights people. And in doing so, they opened fire on blocks of flats and heavy concentrated dwellings, and 8 people were killed. 8 Catholics were killed that night. There was 1 Protestant killed in a riot. There was a British soldier who was home on leave, Catholic, who was shot dead. There was a boy of 9 shot dead, and there were several women and other people killed.
Would you have any insight, Geordy, into why the government is protecting their positions so tenuously? I mean, why are they so against the aims of the civil rights marches?
Well, then it was a way of controlling the country, because the Irish nationalists are not sympathetic to the British point of view. They want their own country, they want the right to rule themselves, and England wants to use the northern part of Ireland for, first it was monetary purposes, now it's different, and they just wanted control. It's their last colony. There's a lot of prestige in it as regards their beliefs.
Well, the British again fall back on the premise that they're a peacekeeping force. Could you tell us what would happen, in your opinion, if the British were to pull out?
Well, first of all, there's been more people killed in the northern part of Ireland from England took direct rule and sent the troops in than they were before. I think that if England left Ireland, that you've got the only other analogy to answer that is when they left in 1920, when they left the southern part of Ireland, there was civil war for political purposes. Then the thing cooled down, and there's no problems in the 26 counties of Ireland regarding strife and neighbour shooting neighbour and Protestant shooting Catholic. It's the fact of the foreign power in stirring it that has created this in the northern part. The Protestant people in the southern part, there were quite a lot of Protestant people living in southern Ireland up to 1920 and still are. The first president of Ireland was a Protestant, Dr. Douglas Hyde, and there's a lot of Protestants in all the political parties in southern Ireland, which doesn't happen in the northern part. But they have stayed and made a life, their business life, commercial, political. So when England goes out, there may be problems, but they will subside and there'll be a problem less. The biggest problem will be gone, England.
Okay, now, oftentimes when we hear about the revolution and the troubles, we hear in the context of the Republican prisoners. Could you shed any light on those aspects for us?
Well, the Republican prisoners, at the start, England has tried and will try almost anything in order to maintain control. At the start, in the 70s, early 70s, she brought in internment, also depth interrogation in order to extract information from these internees and people who were suspect of being in the IRA.
Would these be the heavy squads that we've heard about?
Yeah. Well, they were found guilty at the Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg in England was for using not cruel and humane methods. They got it fine-tuned to say that it wasn't torture, but they had depth interrogation, which consisted of no food, no sleep, being in a room which was all the same colour, and a white noise, as they call it, a high penetrating whine been put into that room over a 24-hour period. So after 2 or 3 days, you were just gone. And they admitted to themselves by the fact that they compensated a lot of these people that willingly had to go to court, and they were found guilty of this torture.
When we say torture, can you elaborate more on this use of torture?
Well, statements were beaten out of people. People were put into helicopters and blindfolded and handcuffed and were being told they were being flown out over the ocean and they'd be pushed into the ocean. They were thrown out but were only several feet above the ground. So it was mental as well as physical. And it was very severe beatings of people. People were badly beaten.
And I'm sure we could document some of the people who
Oh
have
yes,
been beaten.
oh yes, it's documentation.
And medical reports.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the Court of Human Rights went through all this and found, yes, that this thing had been happening.
Okay, good time to take a break.
Well, between Steve's great eulogy and that video, I think everybody here's got a better knowledge of Geordy. I normally I'm normally the end last speaker because I tell some jokes and I can be funny, but this night is special to all of us. That's why we're here. But you know, people like Geordy enter into our sphere, into our life, and while they're here, we don't appreciate them like we should. And after Geordy passed, you know, we were all saying, man, if only I had another lunch or I had another dinner with Geordy. You know, because, well, you saw by that video, his life is, you know, even a movie wouldn't do it justice. It's an amazing life that this man lived. His dedication to a united Ireland is, you know, unsurpassed. I can't think of anybody that, you know, and he didn't see it, and he knew he wasn't going to see it, but he believed it would happen, and it will happen, I think. You know, we met, and his music stuff and the stuff about his life, I had no idea. Somebody introduced us up in Syracuse, probably a couple years, probably 2012, 2011, and I knew him. You know, I knew Kathleen Kelly of Project Children, all the people in Syracuse, Project Children folks, and I heard his name a million times. And one quick story, Kathleen Kelly, we got talking about our event at MVCC, and I was telling Kathleen, I go, Geordy has agreed to speak. She goes, oh, Geordy. She goes, you gotta be careful what he says, you know, you better sanction him somehow. So I said, we're planning the event, and I said, Geordy, there's some people worried about what you'll say. He goes, I can say it. He goes, I'll beat him out the bushes. I won't say much. I won't say anything that I'll be indicted for, but which he did. And I tell you, he did a tremendous job. We had him and Dennis Mulcahy and a young kid that lived in Belfast, Eddie Gilmartin. It was a great example of three different versions of visions of what happened in the Troubles. And it was a kid who was 11 years old, 10 years old. Through the eyes of a kid, we heard it. And his story was he played in the front of his house with his next door neighbor, a girl who got shot in the head and got killed, right in front of him, this far away from him, blood splattered up. So we heard that story. We heard Dennis Mulcahy tell the story of hope and a new future, and bringing young kids over here, Protestant Catholics, and showing them how we do it here. We don't really give a shit what religion you are. It doesn't make any difference. And how we get along, and they go back and maybe they can change things over there. And as 50 years we're celebrating this year at Project Children, I think those kids went back and did change some of the thinking over there. And then, you know, Geordy gave kind of brought everybody back to the reality of what it was. It was a war. And he said that you can paint on any way you want, atrocities, you know, whatever you want, whatever side you're on, you know, it's like Fox and MSNBC. Believe what you want to believe, but he was there and he saw it. And his vision for, you know, having to end, he wanted to end, but he wanted to end in the right way. And the right way is, we got a banner, the AOH here got a banner, England, get out of Ireland. So old Joe White, if any of you know Joe White here, he adamant that we got to buy this banner and march it in the parade. So we buy the banner, and then on parade day, nobody wants to carry it. So me and Joe White carry it. So Geordy says, I heard you carried that banner. I said, yeah. He goes, well, you're proud to carry it? I go, absolutely. You hug me, you know. But in our ties are I love to listen to him about Northern Ireland, because the north of Ireland, because I'm a student of it, and I don't know enough of it, and I can't get enough of it, to be honest. But he would bring it to light to me, and to light to me was our union background. I'm a union guy, he's a union guy, works on the docks. Now, I know some union workers from New York City that work on the docks, and I'm telling you, there are no tougher people in the world than dock workers. They don't put up with any shit. They They tell you how it's gonna be, you don't tell them how it's gonna be. So, we talked about union rights and civil rights, they're the exact same rights. You know, the right to have a good job, the right to get, have a place at the table and talk about your wages and talk about your industry, whatever it is. So we were kind of kindred spirits on the union side of it. And so enjoyable to spend time with him about everything. And I was like a student. I would ask a question, and then if you people who know me, I would shut my mouth for a half hour and listen to the answer. For me to shut my mouth for a half hour is a miracle right there. So he could mesmerize you with his knowledge and his he was right about everything. He was really right about everything. You know, good pay, no discrimination in housing, that shit about the votes. You know, and he said it won't happen in the United States. Well, we better be careful because, and I don't think it's going to happen. But you know, it's heading in the wrong direction. So anyway, great friend. Didn't know him long enough. Wish I knew him my whole life, but I didn't. But you know, if you remember that movie Tuesday with Maury, where some guys would go talk to an older guy and kind of pump him for information about his life. You know, now it's easy to say, but how beneficial it would have been to have somebody from Syracuse University or Lemoyne talk to Geordy every week, in just a half-hour session, have a cup of coffee and write down and write a paper. Because those kids would love to do it, and we should do that. You know, there's other people walking around us, we walk around with the giants, and he was certainly a giant. And you know, and I love to see that video. I saw it a couple times. But as a young man, I know why you fell in love with him. He was a handsome young man, Errol Flynn, like a young Errol Flynn. But it's good to see him full of life. You know, we all remember him at the end, and it's like, you know, it's not the same guy. It's the vessel, but it's not the same guy. But his passion is the same. The day before he passed is that young guy in that video. So, great guy, friend of us down here when we started this place. He loved it. He loved to come down and hold court, like Steve said. If he was in the room, he was holding court. And I used to tell people, shut up, don't interrupt him, just let him talk. Listen, will you? You'll learn more if you keep your mouth shut. But he was one of those guys that when he crosses your life, you never forget it. I'll never forget him. He was a great friend, you know, and I learned so much. And you know, I wish he was still here. I wish I was still learning. So thank you for coming. I'll tell one quick story. So there's some AOH guys here. So this is what I tell everybody when I give the tour of this building up here. That drum there is normally in the corner of the museum. So I bring people up from Syracuse, and I say, who's from Syracuse? They raise their hand. I say, well, that drum over there, Ancient Order of Hibernians, Syracuse. I said, you gotta promise me when you go back to Syracuse, you won't tell those AOH guys that we have it. Because it was stolen. And nobody knows where it is. And if those guys know that we have it, they'll be pissed off at us. So then, before they leave, I go, I was only breaking your balls. I'm only kidding you. They gave us that drum. So, but anyway, thanks for coming. This has been kind of an unusual program. And this mic will be open for anybody who wants to get up and say anything about Geordy, but you know, I respect your time. You got to go back to Syracuse, but normally it's more structured than this. But this is the kind of event that Geordy would have loved, unstructured, from the heart, and you know, we love him. We love his family. So thank you.
And paying for Willie Farrell, and I think it's got the makings of something. And just like every Irishman that I know, I took poetic license in this. And said, I'll be quick, I'll get over it, it'll be gone. And it's called Late Winter Snow. It says, in Tully Town, late winter snow, the truth I'll tell, for it happened so. A life was taken long ago in Tully Town, late winter snow. Young Willie Farrell was his name. From Ireland's hills he proudly came. Hard times had forced him for to go to Tully Town, late winter snow. In the barter store, a resting place, a coward there despised his race. So he took an axe and with cruel blow, he murdered our Willie late winter snow. Then a grave with headstone in Willie's name, from Tully women filled with shame, who cried those tears that mothers know. Then they buried him gently neath winter snow. But Irishmen, they found the grave, the grounds now blessed, a mass was said, the pipes were played, a song was sung, for Willie lad who died so young. Step by that grave and linger there, and in the silence say a prayer. Remember poor Willie, who long ago lost his life late winter snow.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
Yeah, just remember, when Willie Farrell died, there was no such thing as a Catholic in upstate New York. That's why, one of the reasons he was killed, because he wasn't speaking English, he was speaking Irish, and he was Catholic, which to them was like a Martian. And the only Catholic church in upstate New York was right here in Utica, St. John's Church. It was just founded. And St. John's didn't have a priest, and so the priest was sent from Albany to man St. John's Church here in Utica. And it took him 2 weeks, because there was no roads, there was no Erie Canal, any of that. And he had a donkey, and he had to hide his vestments, and he couldn't wear any priestly garb or anything. He just had to disguise himself, because he would have been killed coming out from Albany. So when Willie Farrell was killed, nobody knew what a Catholic was. And that, 1819, I believe, was St. John's Church here. And that was it.
I would just like to thank everybody, all the family and friends, for making the effort to come out today. I know a lot of it was short notice, but fair play to everybody for coming along. Just to pay a wee tribute to my dad, Geordy. I'd also like to thank National Graves for facilitating this wee short commemoration, which allows me to fulfill a promise that I made to my dad, that his commitment and his dedication to the Republican struggle wouldn't pass unnoticed, and that his activism would be remembered back home here in Ireland. And I think this is a fitting tribute. So thanks everyone for coming. And Joe's going to say a few words. Thank you.
I also want to thank the National Graves, because the National Graves, this is an exception. These graves are maintained and kept for people who have fought and died in active service. So it's very unusual that somebody who's died overseas has the right to spread here. So I want to thank the National Graves. I want to read just a short text that Martin Calvin, a director of the Ancient Order of Hibernians, a very powerful American organisation, sent to me. So I'll read it and we'll see where we go. Geordy never forgot where he came from. That saying, a lot of the immigrants who arrive here do forget where they come from. They are understandably occupied with building a new life, and the troubles of Ireland they leave behind. Each day he began by looking for news articles and listening to the BBC cite the Belfast Telegraph on things like Orange March's legacy, the situation in Ireland, and he then circulated into a wide circle of friends with biting comments like, "This is what the Brits mean by equality, this is what the Brits mean by justice." Keeping a large number of people he had been in contact with, informed and strongly motivated. He was a strong voice calling on the AOH to do more for freedom for Ireland and do more for freedom for Palestine. That's very important. The last demonstration, some of you may have seen the photograph, the last demonstration they took part in wasn't for Ireland, but it was for Palestine. At conventions and gatherings of the AOH, he was politically always active, raising the question of Ireland and Palestine, and fundraising for the area he lived in, Syracuse. We had our national convention last month, and when I asked where he was, a couple of people from Syracuse told me how bad he was, and that his health was going down rapidly. When I phoned to ask him about how he was getting on, and how the cancer was affecting him, all he wanted to talk about was the AOH and what we're going to do next year, and how to raise the question of Palestine. That can't be emphasised enough. In America, He said his biggest regret was that he would leave this earth before the Brits were even hired. So that's from Martin Calvin. It says a lot for his political activity. So we're going to lay the ashes now, Martin, do you want it? And then we'll do the reading. Like Martin, I want to thank everybody for being here. So we're only at half the ashes here, and half in Waterford. Waterford is the ancestral home of the Austins, and you properly gathered. Martin fulfilled his promise, and I again want to thank the National Graves for allowing us to do this ceremony here. I want to thank everybody for it. There are a number of reasons. You want to bring them over? Okay, folks, that concludes our ceremony today. So again, thank everybody for coming here.
What a wonderful tribute for a wonderful man. Does anybody else want to make any remarks, any further remarks?
Just before this meeting, Geordy's son Pat sent me photos of Martin, Geordy's son Martin, putting some of the ashes at the place Joe was talking about, Waterfoot. And they took a portion of the ashes and put it there. He said that's where the Austins originated, and that was one of Geordy's favorite place. So I have a photo on my phone here of that.
Oh, yeah, I couldn't tell if it was
I thought he
Waterfoot.
said Waterford.
Waterford, yeah.
Until I got this text.
Oh,
It is Waterfoot, and it is.
and it's in the north.
Yeah, it's an
Okay.
Antrim somewhere.
Again, thank you for coming out. I know, you all came from Syracuse, or much of you came from Syracuse, so as Geordy would say, probably Slonawaya, safe home. And before you go though, we do have